Good afternoon and welcome to today's member webinar. Today we will hear from Andrew Ash and Adam Stevens from the HRIA's Accounting and Business Advisory Partner, HLB Manjud. Andrew is director with HLB Manjud and specialises in assisting business owners and their families with achieving their long-term strategic objectives. He is passionate about developing and implementing realistic, workable and sustainable strategies that are tailored to and benefit business owners, their families and their businesses. Adam is an assistant manager that has worked across HLB's corporate and assurance advisory divisions with over 6 years experience since joining the firm as a graduate in 2016. Adam has extensive experience in auditing ASX listed public and private companies with industry experience across retail companies, including hire, rental and construction. Andrew and Adam will be presenting on how to build a better decision-making framework to manage uncertainty, covering how you plan to navigate this current uncertainty while building a lasting business.
Thank you, Katie. So good afternoon, everyone. So as we know, we're currently living in very interesting times. We've had COVID for the last 2.5 years. We've had the war in Ukraine. Inflation's going a bit mental at the moment. And we're all aware of the resource constraints that are affecting everyone. So with that in mind, today we wanted to just share with you a bit of a framework to make decisions. During uncertain times, there's a lot of complexity that's going on. So having a framework that you can refer to make decisions, we find helps business owners in particular. So in this session, we're going to firstly go through the market overview. So what are we seeing at the moment and what are we hearing from various clients in the industry? And then we're going to go on to what we call the strategy bridge framework. So this is the framework that we use to deal with making decisions during uncertainty. And finally, we're going to take you through a bit of a case study of the framework in action so that you can actually see how it actually operates. So hopefully everyone gets a little bit out of today, and hopefully it's a framework that everyone can start to implement within their businesses. So to get started, I'll pass over to Adam, who'll give you a bit of a market overview.
Thanks, Andrew, and good afternoon, everyone. So I guess interesting with the forecasting of the growth results, because per our market research from Ibis World, the hire and rental industry is actually forecast to contract this year by 5.9%, followed by multiple years of modest growth. Coming out of the pandemic, growth has been noted for most of our clients, but with the uncertainty heading forward, which plays into the research we've received from Xero, the Australian Small Business and Family Enterprise Ombudsman, and McKinsey, the increasing pressures on cash flow are really going to be interesting over the next few years, and how we navigate through that to maintain sustainable business will be quite pivotal for the market. Andrew, do you have any thoughts different to that?
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting, the Ibis World forecasting a contraction. The business owners I've been talking to haven't been saying that. They're either forecasting, well, a lot of them are forecasting flat line, so no growth, but a lot of them are forecasting a slight increase, so a little bit of growth. So it's interesting that Ibis is forecasting a contraction. And I guess it probably highlights the fact that there's a lot of complexity going on at the moment and things are uncertain. I think this kind of highlights again the uncertainty that is currently going on in the economy. So the September CPI figures, so it's the CPI, I guess, essentially measures inflation. And for September, it was at 7.3%. And you can see that graph there. It's quite daunting. You can see that, we haven't had this kind of inflation in, over 20 years. So, there's a lot of questions about, okay, where to from here? Does that graph start to go down? Does it continue to go up? Where do we go? So a very big question mark at the moment. And you can understand why why we're getting, varying opinions on the growth of the industry and the economy over the next few years. So what else, I guess, what else are we hearing from business owners at the moment? So besides growth, what are they, what are some of the other challenges? So I'll pass over to you, Adam, to run through a couple of things that we're hearing from some business owners.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, there's three main themes that we've been hearing about on a recurring basis, and the first one of those being staffing. And I suppose since the pandemic, there's been a significant shift in the working environment, given the prominence of working from home now, or remote working even, and businesses are now facing pressure not only to hire staff but also retaining good staff, given that there's increased demands for flexibility, and also the demand in the market with the supply shortage is imposing some significant challenges in itself. Andrew, I don't know if you have anything further to add there.
Yeah, so I think the staffing one's a real interesting one, and I think it's across industries. It's definitely in the hire industry, but it's across the board. Everyone's struggling with staffing, and you're probably sick of hearing it. But the one thing that I've probably learned from clients going through this problem at the moment is, even though you might be struggling to find staff, don't compromise on who you hire. So I've had a number of businesses who have just decided, we just need someone. So they've hired whoever applied, even though they weren't a perfect fit. And a lot of them that have done that have run into problems. So if you're not sure about a potential hire and you don't think they're quite a good cultural fit, my advice would be, don't compromise. Even though it's tight, I think you're better off to wait. Which I know can be easier said than done, but I think you're worse off if you hire the wrong person. So apart from staffing, if we just go to the next slide. So I'm also, cash flow is a huge topic at the moment that I'm speaking to clients about. It's no surprise because we just went through the CPI inflation figures. So things are getting more expensive, and as a result, cash flow is getting tighter. People's margins are getting reduced. So people's return on their investment and the return on the risk that they take being in business is actually going down. Overheads are going up, with people having debt to finance machinery, or if they own property to finance that. Interest rates are going up. So these kind of costs are quite significant, and they're definitely impacting the bottom line. A lot of businesses are also starting to see debtors extend. A lot of them aren't extending they're not blowing out by a lot, but they're still blowing out. And essentially what that means is that your customers, your clients are essentially using you as finance. So you've got to really pay close attention to that particular item, especially if things do take a turn. If we do have some kind of contraction, making sure that your debtors are protected so you don't have any bad debts is super important. And then, like I said earlier, the businesses I'm speaking to are forecasting either lower growth or no growth. None of them that I've spoken to are saying it's going to be negative growth. So I guess that's a positive. So opportunities, Adam, do you have some points on this?
Yes, another recurring theme for us is that even with the forecast economic downturn, potentially, there's businesses that are putting themselves in position to take advantage of opportunities that can arise in a down cycle. Businesses that have been planning ahead and are putting themselves in a great position to probably take advantage of opportunities that other businesses may not be focused on, and trying to manage other areas. That does present multiple opportunities to take advantage of, even potentially transitioning your business to create multiple generations of succession. This is a good time to start putting these plans in place, and our strategy framework moving forward should help with this.
Yeah, I think on the opportunity side, I've definitely had a lot more businesses come and talk to me about trying to find finance. So as Adam said, you know, downturns can create opportunities. So they're just wanting to get ready to pounce on opportunity if it does arise. Now, obviously, it depends where you are in your life cycle and how much I guess how much of a war chest in terms of cash that you have on your side will probably determine how many opportunities you can look at pursuing. But yeah, it's definitely a theme that I'm seeing at the moment. Okay, so finding and keeping staff. Yep. That's So that's not a surprise. No one's saying anything about cash flow. That's an interesting one actually. So staffing is at the head. Okay, so there's a lot of uncertainty. We've said it a few times now, and the current situation is very complex. So to help everyone, I guess, move through this complexity, it's good to have a framework. So this is a framework that we use with a lot of our clients. And it's a very simple framework that you can implement in your business very easily. And so the first step in the, so just to explain the strategy bridge. So the first step is to define what your desired state is. What does success look like for you? Then to go back and work out, okay, how, you know, where are we at the moment? How are we currently performing? So that you can work out what the gap between where you want to be and where you currently are is at the moment. Once you know what the gap is and what's in your way, you can then start to formulate a strategy that you can implement, and then a governance structure to manage obstacles and challenges. So I'll go through it in a bit more detail so that you can understand it a bit better. So step one of the framework. So defining success. So this is a really important part of the puzzle. And a lot of business owners, they might vaguely know what they want to achieve, but often they only vaguely know it, and they don't actually consider the whole picture. So it's really important to take a really holistic approach to defining your success. And with family businesses in particular, there's three main, I guess, stakeholders that you really need to consider when defining your success. And the first one is your business. So what do you want out of your business? It could be, look, I want to grow this business to 5 mil turnover and sell it in 10 years time, being really specific about what your goal is. Then the second stakeholder, as an owner, what's important to you? So maybe having more time on your hands, maybe only working 4 days a week is important to you. What kind of retirement do you want? So what kind of life do you want when you eventually get to retirement? And being really specific about that. And then again, what do you want for your family? Maybe you want to grow the business to a point where you can provide for your family or your extended family in, you know, education or in housing or whatnot. Or maybe with your family, you want a family member to come into your business. So I think really taking the time to sit down and mapping out exactly what you want is super important as a first step. So once you have that written down and you know where you're headed, the second step is to work out, okay, where are we currently? And assessing the performance of the business at the moment. So how far away are you from actually achieving that end objective is a really important piece of the puzzle. Now, with this stage of the process, so with defining success, generally, once you define it, you don't really want the goalpost to change too often. If you're changing the goalpost every month, it's very hard to hit the target. So I like to define success at the start of the journey, at least. So look at it once a year as a starting point, unless something remarkably changes. So define success and then assess your current state. So the current state, when you're assessing your performance, is done more regularly. So this is something that you do, it can be weekly a lot of my clients I do this every month with. So this is a lot more frequent, this step of the framework. So Adam, I'll pass over to you to explain this particular part of the framework.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, we as advisors, we understand that it's likely that no one knows your business better than you guys do as operators, but it can be difficult when you're, to use an analogy of one of my clients actually, they often note that it feels like they're running a train while also building the tracks in front of it. And it's difficult sometimes to take a step back and see the full scope of your business when you're so caught up in the daily operations. And we really find that using this key business model is a great way to break things down into segments and take a broader view across where your business currently stands against your desired state. So we look at that from, starting with your mission and vision and how that aligns with your core capabilities, your cost structuring, your innovation, and even how that ties in with your clients and your pricing models and delivery. We just find this is a really nice way to break it down into segments and get a different view of your business versus hopping in from the ground floor looking up.
Yeah, I think the way I agree with you, Adam. So this this diagram essentially shows a number of levers that you can pull within your business. And if we go back to the poll question that we had before, so staffing being an issue. So the box on the, I guess, middle left, so cost structure and resourcing. So that's where your staff sits in. So this is a big lever. This is a problem area for a lot of businesses at the moment. So it's a real focus. So by going through your business model and working out where the pain points are, is a good first step in assessing how you're currently performing. So that's one piece of the puzzle. So assessing your business model. When assessing performance, looking at your financial data is very, very important as well. So the first piece of data that I like to assess when looking at a business is what's called return on assets. So this is the return that you receive on any assets that you purchase. The return on assets is calculated by getting your net profit and dividing it by the total cost of the asset. So you can see here we've got. So if you think about your own business, so how do you assess your performance with your individual assets? So you go through, you map out each of the assets, and you do this calculation. So here we've got two assets, the same value. So everything, cost of the equipment is exactly the same. So 63,000. The repayments are exactly the same, but they're performing slightly differently. So the revenue side in scenario one is 26,000 a year compared to the second asset in scenario two, which is 19,000. So you can see that both assets are producing a pretty good return. So scenario asset one, 35%, that's pretty good. And even scenario two, 24% is a very good return. It's a return that you won't receive in the share market unless you are, Warren Buffett or someone extraordinary. But this is only part of the story. So this calculation is really good when you line up your assets and want to highlight assets that aren't performing. So if you line up your assets, you've got one at, most of them around the 35 mark, and then you've got a couple at the 24, maybe you've got one at the 10% mark. It helps you to then pinpoint which assets you should maybe be moving away from, or maybe it's time to get rid of. So this is return on assets, but this only shows you part of the picture. The second part of the picture when assessing your individual assets is their cash flow profile. So yes, they might be producing a positive return, 35 or 24%, but how much cash do I have at the end of the day? So with that first asset, scenario one, we can see that this has a very healthy cash flow profile. We can see in year one, 11,000, and then year 2, 3, and 4, 6. So very healthy profile. And this isn't even including the sale of the asset at the end of its life. So, a very, very positive outlook. But let's look at scenario 2. So that second asset. Now, they're exactly the same, except for the revenue profile. So this one is producing slightly less revenue, $19,000 a year. It's still quite a, it's still very healthy revenue number for an asset. But you can see the cash flow profile at the bottom there. So year 1, we're good. We're happy days. We've got $4,000 of positive cash flow. But year 2, 3, and 4, we hit into negative territory, which over the life of this particular asset, it's fine. It's positive. The whole asset is positive. But if you have a collection of assets with a similar cash flow profile, so let's say you have 50 assets, all with this exact profile, you are going to run into some real hardship in year 2, 3, and 4. And without cash flow, essentially your business can stall and won't be able to go any further. So assessing your cash flow profile is super important, because without cash, no matter what the return is, it'll die. So super important metrics to assess your performance. Okay, so that's assessing your individual assets. Now, it's really important to assess the entire business as a whole. So lumping all your assets together, what are they producing? What did they produce last year? And then doing a couple of various scenarios. So in this particular example, we've got a business that is turning over 1.1 million. Their costs are 700,000, so they're making profit of 400,000, which is a very, very healthy amount of profit. However, looking at net profit is a very dangerous or a deceiving thing to just monitor, because it doesn't tell you what cash you're going to have left over at the end of the day. And I constantly get this statement from clients when dealing with them: I'm making profit. I'm making good, healthy money. Where is the cash? I've got no money, and I don't actually. They start doubting what they're doing. They're like, if I can't make, if I don't have cash at this kind of profit level, I'm obviously doing something wrong. And that's not the case. It's just they're not looking at the entire picture. So in the middle scenario, so you've got a free cash flow at the end of the day of $40,000. So this is $40,000 that you've got available to you to meet those objectives that we did in step 1. Is that enough cash flow to actually get to those objectives? Is a question that you need to ask. And if it's not, then what needs to change to get you to free up more cash? You can see in that example, so the 5% growth. So with a client that I'm working with at the moment, we went through this exact exercise. If nothing changed, he'd be left with, cash in the bank, but it was nothing to write home about. So to actually achieve his objectives, he needs to grow. He needs to grow the business. So there are a few levers that you can pull to grow. You can either increase your pricing to a level, hopefully, that you don't lose too many. You've got to be careful with it, but you can increase pricing, or you can expand. You can buy more assets and sell and hire out more equipment to gain that growth. So with this particular client, when he saw his profile being at the $40,000 mark, but he needed it to be at the 5% mark, we then went and listed out his assets, listed out the assets that we could purchase. We assessed his return on assets. We assessed the profile of the individual assets, and then assessed the cash flow profile of each of the assets. So at the end of the process, he was left with a hit list of assets to then go and purchase. that's a process that every business within the industry should do. And maybe you are doing it, but maybe the framework or the governance around doing it is a bit more loose, to say the least. So that's some of the, I guess, the financial metrics that I like to look at when assessing a business. So we now know where you want to be. We now know how you're currently performing. We can then start to build a strategy around getting you to that endpoint and implementing. So what I'll do is I'll go through an example. So with this particular business, so we like to split it out. So the desired state. So again, if you remember in the first couple of slides, we look at what's the desired state for the business, what's the desired state for your family, and as owners, what do you want? So for this particular business, so they wanted to grow to $2.5 million in turnover, and they really wanted to focus on attracting some more long-term employees that they could promote into management positions so that they could then grow the business further. So the 2.5 was a stepping stone for a larger goal, but the immediate goal was that 2.5 turnover. So currently the business is in a location within Australia that has a lot of geographical competition. So when there's multiple hire businesses within the same town or same city, and you're all competing against each other, it can put a bit of a squeeze on pricing, which is not really good for anyone in that situation. But so this particular business was struggling with that issue. They couldn't move too much on pricing, otherwise their competitor would take away some of their work. So the business was experiencing very tight cash, and as a result, the business owner was in a state of decision paralysis. So similar to when I was going through that cash flow example, he was saying, look, I'm making this profit, I've got no cash, maybe I should just give up. I'm obviously doing something wrong. It's not working. And it's not a nice place to be in. So that was his current state. So then from a family perspective, what did he want? So he wanted to grow his family wealth, and he wanted to go through a process of separating out his family wealth from his business wealth. He recognized the fact that being in business has risks, and he wanted to protect his family from that risk. So making sure that he's extracting the right amount of wealth from the business into other assets to kind of protect him and his family in the future. Currently, he has a lot of children. Well, he's got 4 young children, so that's a fair few in this day and age. And yeah, very, very young, so all under 10 years old. And when you have children, you need to give them time. So he was very conscious that he wanted to get more time for his family. So from a personal owner's perspective, how is his current state, his desired state, sorry. So ideally he wanted to reduce his working days to 4. That was his kind of sweet spot. That would give him enough time to spend, an additional day with his kids and go to their, performances and sporting events and just help out more. He wanted to improve the flexibility of his current business so that he could take a Tuesday afternoon off if he needed to for his family. And he wanted to improve his health. So he was pouring everything into this business, stressed out of his mind, not eating right, a very, very common story. So he wanted to improve his health. And as I said, he was working 6 to 7 days a week. he wasn't extracting much cash from the business, and as a result, his health was kind of suffering. So as you can see, there's a lot of complexity in this situation. He's got this desired state. He's very clear on what he wants, but he's not there, and he's struggling. So essentially, we use the strategy bridge framework, and we sat down and we went through stage by stage. And the first thing we did was did some cash flow forecasting. So we got all the data from all of his assets, all of his overheads, and we forecasted it out. So let's have a look at, if you do nothing today and your business just carries on, where are you going to be in 12 months' time? And is that a satisfactory position for you to be in? We went through that process. The answer was no. He wasn't happy with it. He was in a better position than he gave himself credit for, but it wasn't where he wanted to be. So then we went through each of his individual assets and we benchmarked his return on assets for each of them. We identified the ones that weren't performing well, and we went through a strategy of moving them on. So they're not for us, they're not performing. Let's turn them into cash and reinvest it into assets that are performing higher. And through that process, we set a benchmark. So our return on asset benchmark that we chose was 35%. Whenever we're assessing a piece of equipment, let's aim for that. That is a good benchmark for us to hit. We then went through, once we identified the assets that weren't performing and that we should move on, we then worked out, okay, what's a wish list of assets that we want to acquire to get some further growth? And we went through, at the start of the year, there was probably, 20 or 30 assets that we listed out. We had all their data, the profile of all of them. And it's interesting when you map out the return on asset and the cash flow, how people's decisions change. So some of the assets that he was going to purchase and was very keen on actually produced negative cash flow early on in the cycle. And there were a few like that. And he wasn't, at this stage in his business life cycle, he wasn't prepared to go through that negative cycle again. He'd just been through it. So it was a really good way for us to actually pinpoint, these are the assets that are going to perform the best. They have the best cash flow profile. We know exactly what we want to go out and purchase. So it really gave him clarity and focus, which he didn't have, and helped him to make a decision. Because like I said, he was in a state of decision paralysis. This actually shone a light on, okay, well, here's a decision you can make. Here's the data for it. So it's quite an important process. And then through that process, we also looked at pricing. So we noticed constantly get the, I can't increase prices. My competitor, I can't increase prices. But challenging him on that particular point, and testing it out with a few assets was a really important part of the strategy. Turns out no loss of business, prices have gone up, everything's fine. He could increase prices, but we just went through a stage of actually testing out how much could the market cope, and being a little bit more creative with the pricing as well. So we did this process at the start of the year. We knew that he was going to have more cash. If everything went to plan, he's going to have more cash. So we increased the amount of pay that he was taking home, because I think it's very important to feel like you're getting a reward for the hard work that you're putting into the business. And by using the crystal ball that is your cash flow forecast, you can be confident in the fact that you can make that decision to take a higher salary amount. And then the final point that we really needed to address was creating capacity so that he could spend more time with his family. And at the very minimum, only work 5 days. 6-7 days, it's too much. You burn out, and you're not actually working on your business if you're doing that. So we went through a process of identifying what a good hire would be to take some capacity, or to give him some capacity, and take some of the work off him. And again, because we had the forecast in place, we knew what the end of the year was going to be. We knew that we could afford it. So we did the numbers, we did the math, we weren't guessing. So we went through that process. So yeah, so that's stage 1, 2, 3 of the process. The final stage of the process is dealing with obstacles and challenges as they turn up. It's a certainty things are going to turn up. COVID turns up, various inflation turns up, things are going to turn up. You're going to experience issues, you're going to have staffing issues. It's going to happen. The important thing to make sure that you're ready for obstacles and are on the front foot is having a good governance structure in place. So a governance structure is essentially, it's a structure that keeps you accountable. So you've gone through this hard work of working out what your destination is, working out where you want to be, working out your strategy to get there. Now you need to be held accountable for actually executing on the strategy. So good governance puts in a process for you to actually execute on your strategy. Now with most family, depending on the size of your business, will depend on the type of governance structure that you might put in place. But I would say that the majority, probably 90% of businesses, a key governance structure that they should have is an advisory board. So essentially, it can be made up of family members, business owners, potentially some staff members, if depends on how close you are with them, staff members, and it can be advisors. So it can be your accountants, it can be lawyers, it can be other people. But essentially, setting up a structure in place for you to then be held accountable for your strategy. So with that example that I was talking about earlier, so early on in the piece, and this is how I deal with most of my engagements, is early on in the piece, we have an advisory board and it's every week. It's every week for 6 weeks because we need to get some action quickly off the bat. Once we've got the strategy down pat, then it becomes every month. So essentially every month I'm meeting with them and we're going, okay, this is where you want to be. Has anything changed? Hopefully not. Hopefully the goalposts are still the same. Okay, this is how you're currently performing in the last month. What's happening? What's working? What's not working? What obstacles are presenting themselves, and what obstacles can we predict are about to turn up? So it really is governance is a way to make business owners and staff accountable and to keep everyone on track. Otherwise, the risk is that you do all this hard work, it sits in the drawer, we all get busy, and we're at the same place in 12 months' time. So this particular part of the framework is really important. And Adam, I think you got a couple of points on this particular point.
Yeah, I would say just as we try to move towards our desired state from our current state, it's really about creating habits to create sustained change and success. And when I think about a habit, I feel like it's driven by 3 main things, being a prompt, a motivation, and the ability. And I think once we have these governance structures in place, be it the advisory board, to take it back to what Andrew was saying, that puts in place a prompt to hold you accountable to moving towards that desired state. And naturally, with the people you have on this advisory board, you'll find the ability to create that change. And then it's just a matter of maintaining that motivation. And through having these regular catch-ups, particularly early on, as you try and drive this process, I find it really puts a good framework in place to get those habits in place and really move towards that desired state.
Yeah, great. And we've talked about, I guess the case study we've been working through is a growth business kind of early on in the growth cycle. But this is it's still very important for those at a later point in the business cycle. So succession in particular, having a good governance structure in place is really important. When your children are, if you've got children in the business, working in the business, having a governance structure to educate them and to get them in the room to actually help for them to see how you make decisions. A business owner that's been in business for 30 years has a wealth of knowledge, and a lot of the knowledge is they probably can't explain. You kind of have to see it in action. So having an advisory board or a family council where you make decisions or you talk about the performance of the business is a really good training ground for the next generation. So for those businesses at that kind of succession stage of the cycle, getting a structure like this in place and bringing the next generation in is really, really valuable. And with succession, I think the number one thing that people need to make sure that they're doing is communicate. It's generally the hardest thing for families to do. There's a lot of things that are unsaid within a family. So having a good governance structure in place is a good way to actually have a platform to have communication amongst family members. Yeah, very, very important. So there you have it. So there's the framework that we use. So as we all know, we're going through a lot of uncertain times. So I would encourage everyone on the call, and if anyone's, if you're talking to other business owners that need a bit of a prompt and a bit of a framework, I'd encourage you to share this with them as well. So firstly, again, what does success look like? Making sure you define it, be super clear and precise on what that is. Know how you're performing. So what metrics are you actually looking at to work out how you're currently performing? And I would encourage you to look at, so with step B, I'd encourage you to look at your return on assets and look at your cash flow forecast and your free cash flow. So 3 things that I think are really important to help you make decisions. Once you understand how you're performing, you can then, it'll become clear as day what's not working. So the strategy piece, it'll become clear as day. Once you go through A and B, clear as day what your strategy needs to be and how to implement it. And finally, D, probably just as important, maybe the most important step of the whole piece is being accountable. So you've done all this hard work. How are you going to make sure that you actually execute on your strategy? So getting a governance structure in place to deal with those obstacles and those challenges as they arise. Firstly, I think we've got a polling question, Adam.
Yep. So we'll just finish with one final polling question covering the topics that we've discussed today, being the return on assets, the cash flow forecasting, and the strategy bridge. If you could please indicate which of these topics you'd like to hear more about, or alternatively, once we move into questions, if you'd like to let us know if there is something more pressing for your business that you'd like to know about, by all means come forward and we'd be happy to assist.
Yeah, I think we're going to be at the conference next year. We're quite excited to be there in Sydney this year, which will be great. So it'd be good to know what people want to hear more about and what kind of information that they're interested in and what would be helpful. So any suggestions or anything that you're interested in hearing more about will be be good to hear from everyone. Okay, so if there are no questions, we do have a slide with our details on it. So I know that there's probably a lot for everyone to digest there, and I went through it very quickly. But if you've got any questions and you want to discuss any of the items that we've been through, please reach out to us. For the hiring members, we're more than happy to do a free consultation to kind of take you through the framework in a bit more detail and answer any questions. So if there's no questions that are coming through.
Someone's just thanked you guys in the question section. So
thank you very much.
But yeah, if there's no more questions, that'll conclude today's webinar. Thank you again to Andrew and Adam, and thank you to everybody who attended. As always, the National Office is always here to assist, so feel free to reach out. Thanks, everyone.